The clock is ticking. It's day 14 of the US shutdown and just days to go before the United States faces the risk of default. China is an opportunity, not a threat. Britain's Chancellor begins a 7-day charm offensive in Beijing to attract foreign investment. Hello and a warm welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, food prices creep up in China and exports unexpectedly drop. We'll have the latest from our team in the region. But first, it's day 14 and the US shutdown enters its third week, and there is still no sign of a deal, an end to the deadlock over government spending and raise the federal debt ceiling, which expires this Thursday. Late on Sunday, the head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, warned a US default would tip the world into recession. Our chief economics correspondent Hugh Pym explains what's at stake and how the current budget impasse could affect everyone around the world.
So what is the debt ceiling? Well, in many months, the US government spends more money than it gets in. Like anyone who's short of cash, it borrows money to make up the shortfall. That borrowing is done via the US Treasury through the issuing of IOUs called bonds. US bonds are seen as one of the world's safest investments. However, back in 1939, Congress put in place the first limit on total accumulated debt of all kinds, a ceiling on the amount of debt the US government can have. So when it needs to borrow more, Congress has to vote on raising that ceiling. So why don't they vote to increase it? Well, in recent years, US lawmakers have used this vote as a way of protesting against other issues. And this time, Republicans are using the vote to protest against President Obama's healthcare plans. The current ceiling is $16.7 trillion, and the USA hit that level of debt back in May. Since then, the US Treasury's been scraping together all the cash it can to keep the government fully funded. They estimate those reserves will run out around October the 17th. So what then? Well, no one knows for sure, since the debt ceiling has always been raised before the cash runs out. The government will keep trying to pay its bills, which will include the interest on those IOUs and paying back some debt. But by the end of October, it may be forced to delay an interest or debt repayment. Not paying what you owe when you owe it is known as a default, and lenders hate defaults. US bonds would no longer be seen as a safe investment, and that shock wave would reverberate through the global financial markets at the very least, probably raising interest rates for the whole world.
Hugh Pym there. Now let's speak to Chris Oates, North America analyst with Oxford Analytica. Chris, nice to see you again. It's the same conversation we're having, Chris, isn't it? The lack of movement in Washington. Are you surprised we're this close to the deadline now and they still haven't come to an agreement?
Well, they haven't come to an agreement, but they're talking about the right questions now. Over the weekend, the Senate was having some debate, and the talks seemed to center around the levels of funding for a continuing resolution and the length of that resolution. Now, that's a very good thing, because when the Senate is talking about numbers, you can always get to some level in the middle. This started because there were two mutually exclusive issues of doing the healthcare law or not having the healthcare law. So now that they've gone from that to numbers, I think that's a very positive thing, and I think it makes it much more likely that a deal will happen.
Interesting as well that the Obama administration didn't go for the short-term extension to, say, middle of November, which was a deal offered at the end of last week. Why do you think they made that decision? Do you feel they have to force this issue now rather than wait?
Well, they didn't do it because if it was extended till November, effectively we're still in the same situation of any negotiations is under the threat of a default. And what they were very clear about is on a principle of simply constitutional governance, is that they wouldn't negotiate when there was that threat of a default. They wanted the debt ceiling to be resolved before they moved to budget talks. And now effectively that's happened. So hopefully it does get resolved. I mean, the problem is when you're this close, if something goes wrong, if some leader makes a gaffe, if the power goes out in the Senate, for example, that could push it down to the deadline and allow something to happen. But hopefully, within the next couple of days, you'll see a resolution.
What do you think the resolution will be? I know that's a tough question to answer, but what do you think the final outcome will be?
Most likely is that the Republican demands going into the shutdown of changing the health care law, of other policy attachments they had attached to a debt ceiling bill will be completely dropped, And the most likely scenario is some level of continuing resolution to keep the budget going, the government open, until about January, at a level of funding in between what the Democrats and the Republicans both want at the moment.
All right, Chris, we appreciate your time this morning. Chris Oates, North America analyst at Oxford Analytica. Now, Britain's finance minister, that's Chancellor George Osborne, is in China to strengthen economic relations between the two countries. Today, he's been speaking to students at Peking University, and observers say there are signs relations are improving, and so far, Osborne's announced the UK will relax visa rules for Chinese visitors and has unveiled a $1.3 billion plan for Chinese investment in Manchester Airport. That's creating 16,000 new jobs. Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Beijing, Celia Hatton, who is following this visit. Celia, what are people saying where you are about this trip?
Well, so far, the announcement that's generated the most attention on Weibo, that's China's version of Twitter, is George Osborne's announcement that some visa regulations would be relaxed to allow more tourists, more business people to travel to the United Kingdom. That's generated a lot of positive excitement on Weibo, and so far that seems to be the thing that's really getting a lot of attention here. And in many ways, it would make sense, doesn't it, to relax those visa rules. It seemed unusual that Chinese visitors in particular had to get separate visas just to come to the UK. Oh, absolutely. And I think that UK visa officers, when they realized that many people were choosing just to skip the UK because they had to fill out a separate visa form just to visit the UK, they realized they were missing out on a lot of very high-end Chinese tourists, people who spend a lot of money in boutiques in Paris, for example, were simply not choosing to go to London to spend the same amount of money. They realized that if they tinkered with the visa rules a little bit and relaxed some of those rules, they could encourage more of those people to travel to the United Kingdom. And they're also hoping to fast-track certain visas for business people who need visas very quickly, within 24 hours, for instance. It might be easier for those people to travel to the UK now.
And very briefly, Celia, in terms of trade deals, we know about the investment near Manchester Airport. Any other deals we're hearing about at this point?
We're hearing about a possible deal on nuclear energy that will be coming up later this week. The Chancellor will also be traveling to southern China to visit the offices of Huawei, which is a major technology company in China. They've already announced that Huawei will be opening an office in the UK. So throughout the week, he will be traveling through the country. They will be announcing further deals. And so we're seeing that he's trying to announce a variety of deals across industries in the United Kingdom.
All right, Celia, thank you very much. Celia Hatton, who's in Beijing for us. Well, if we stay with China, it's had some economic numbers out this morning, which are a little worrying, I have to say. Inflation crept up to a 7-month high in September, in particular food prices. And in the same month, there's been an unexpected fall in exports. Let's go to Rico Hizon, who's also in the region for us at our Asia Business Hub. Nice to see you, Rico. Tell us more about this news.
Well, let's start off with consumer prices. It rose to 3.1%, Sally, and that was higher than market forecast for 2.9%. You mentioned a spike in food prices, which was the main driver. Authorities also blamed national holidays in late September and early October, along with floods and droughts in some areas, cooling temperatures as well with the onset of autumn, rising traveling costs, and a hike in fuel prices were also key factors. But producer prices, on the other hand, fell by 1.3%, which shows China manufacturers have yet to benefit from government measures to boost factory growth. As for export growth, well, it was a disappointment, Sally. It fizzled in September as sales to Southeast Asia fell by double digits, and the rising yuan against the US dollar were the key factors. Overall, China's exports dropping 0.3% from a year earlier, but imports fared better, rising by 7.4%. And when you speak with analysts, they say, looking ahead, export data may be quite weak in the coming months as the financial turmoil drags global demand. Sally.
Thank you very much indeed, Rico, keeping us all up to date. Well, let's show you the markets now. An unusual day because Japan is closed for a public holiday. And as you can see, we've got a fairly mixed picture, really. And these markets are digesting the news you've just heard from Rico out of China, and also the fact there's still seemingly no movement in Washington. I'll see you soon for a look at the papers.